Assemblyman Phil Palmesano in Segment 1, Assemblyman Bill Nojay in Segment 2.
It's time for Top Story on AM 1480 WLEA Hornell.
Assemblyman Palmesano, first question I wanted to ask you about the Tuesday night elections. First off, your thoughts on the state Senate Republican victory.
Oh, I thought that was fantastic news to have the Republicans get back control of the state Senate, a decisive majority with no having to worry about having a coalition with the IDC. I think the fact that they were able to get a clear victory majority, I think that's a very positive thing.
And not to interrupt you, but when you say a coalition with the IDC, you mean the Shared Independent Democratic Conference. Could you explain that to us?
Yes, over the last 2 years, there wasn't a majority of Republicans in the state Senate, but there was a breakaway coalition. It started with 4, now it's 5. They call themselves the Independent Democratic Caucus or Conference, and what they did is they formed a governing coalition with the Senate Republicans to kind of run the government over the past 2 years. And the IDC had said earlier that after the election they were going to come back to the traditional Democratic caucus and form a partnership with them. And the fact that the Senate Republicans were able to get full control, 32 Republicans, and then there's one Democrat who's been sided with the Republicans all along, Senator Felder out of New York City. That puts your number at 33, and that's a governing majority right there. So that's positive news, especially when you think of some of the legislation that Mayor de Blasio and some of his followers wanted to push forward.
And he would be somewhat of an influence over the IDC?
Not so much the IDC is the fact that if it was a Democratic-controlled state Senate, which would have happened if the Republicans didn't get outward control.
The two top issues in this part of upstate, I would think, would be the SAFE Act and Common Core. More the SAFE Act than Common Core. Your thoughts on how the SAFE Act played a role in the recent election?
Well, I think it played a role, especially I think in those Senate districts that we won, to help get control of the majority. I think they played a big role. I think in our upstate districts here, I think it certainly, although the SAFE Act wasn't a federal issue, I think the whole issue of gun control and the Second Amendment rights was certainly prevalent in the congressional race. And I think, certainly I was very pleased that Tom Reed didn't just win, but he had a decisive victory. Won every county but Tompkins, and won those counties very decisively, and I was very happy to see him be reelected for another term, which is for our area.
Your thoughts on Obama's lack of popularity, according to recent polls, playing a factor in New York State politics?
Well, I think, obviously, just what you saw across the country, and even in the state outside of probably the statewide races, it was just a little over a month ago where the President Obama himself said it, although I'm not on the ballot, my policies are on the ballot. And the fact of the matter is there is a resounding message sent across this country that the people did not like his policies and the way things were going. And I think they put in, giving another group of people, I think giving the Senate Republicans at the federal level and now House Republicans with a bigger majority, gives them the opportunity to govern, and I think President Obama has to, hopefully, try to work with them rather than just try to do executive orders for policy just because he's trying to create a legacy.
Common Core, that would have been another big issue in the recent election held last Tuesday night, November 4th.
Oh, absolutely, and I think one message that was sent is Rob Astorino. Although he lost his election, one of the lines he was running on was to stop Common Core, and that did receive over 50,000 votes on that ballot, so that line will be in existence now for the next 4 years. And I just think the message being sent across the state is people were not happy with Common Core. There's a lot of frustration. Certainly, we all know what a disastrous implementation it was, but there's still a lot of concerns and questions about it, and I think this issue is not going to go away from the state perspective. I don't think the governor can keep embracing it as he has without dealing with this. And I think there's going to be a number of legislators, myself included, that are going to continue to push. When you think of this exhaustive testing and some of this curriculum that's being out there, it needs to be adjusted, it needs to be fixed, scrapped, or whatever. Take a time and pause instead of just rushing through with this. And I think you're going to see more discussions and hopefully more action on this issue when we get back to Albany in January.
Wanted to move on now to the St. James Hospital issue. St. James looking at possibly losing inpatient services, which would force people in Hornell and the surrounding area to go elsewhere. Have you had any talks recently with hospital officials or any state officials or anyone else?
Well, we certainly there's been a lot of discussions. We've had previous discussions with St. James officials. We've had a letter that was written by Congressman Reed, myself, Senator O'Meara, Bill Nojay. We've also had recent conversations with Joe Giglio, and we're going to continue to make the case that inpatient services and maternity should be a part of health care for the Hornell area and the surrounding area, not just the city of Hornell, but the surrounding area and the population that it serves. Brian, when you think of Hornell, I mean, we're the only area that has a professional fire department, professional police department, professional ambulance corps. We have a major international manufacturer, and there's a population that needs those types of services. And to think that someone will be able to go to Jones or go over to Noise, especially in the middle of winter, is not really a good thing in my opinion. And we're going to continue to try to make the case. We're going to work with our local officials. We've been in touch with John Hogan and John Buckley, and we know that there was a recent meeting there. And we're going to continue to outreach and talk to whoever we can to try to make the case. We all know that healthcare is changing across this country, especially the impact of rural areas with the changes. And certainly the management of Catholic Health East and Trinity had a lot to be desired. And I think now we need to make sure that we're making a case to the Department of Health and trying to and plead and tell them that these services can be provided. It doesn't have to be at the level it was before with 100+ inpatient beds, but certainly a limited inpatient presence for those who need it. When you think of the heavy senior population we have in the public, it's something we're going to continue to make the case for and advocate to whoever will listen.
By the way, Monday on the Newsmaker Show here on AM 1480 WLEA, Kevin Dorn will be talking with Dr. Byron Collins and Dr. Ismail Mayer about St. James Hospital and their plans to save it in the current form that it's in. Assemblyman Palmesano, do the Republicans have an agenda, any plans, especially regarding Common Core and the SAFE Act? Any more possible reforms there?
Well, I think, Brian, first, the one good thing, I think with the Senate Republicans getting full control of the state Senate, I think that's going to be a roadblock to any type of hindrances or any type of additional legislation to try to do more. There's a lot of talk about that, proposals out there that people are going to try to push after the election. I think with the Senate Republicans now in control, we won't see that happen, which is a good thing. And I think you'll see continued pressure to try to repeal it, to claw back some of the other provisions in the law, and that's a good thing. And certainly that's going to be running concurrent with the lawsuit that's still ongoing relative to the constitutionality of the SAFE Act. I think on the Common Core issue, I think we have legislation that's been out there that will continue to push. Taking a step back, let's get people who are involved in education here in our state reviewing things and let them be a part of this discussion rather than just letting this be dictated from the federal level and then people in Albany and bureaucrats. Let's get our teachers on the ground, our special education teachers and our elementary education teachers involved in developing a local curriculum and let it be for our own state and not just taking a one-size-fits-all approach. I think there needs to be a lot more pause with this. Not to bring the issue of fracking into it, but we've waited 5 years. People want to pause because they don't want to rush things because of what could happen. But we're talking about our children. And I think we certainly need to be, and I certainly am not going to stop speaking out, from when I talk to parents and teachers and students about trying to address the problems that are still out there and the exhaustive testing that is so linked with everything is one of these issues that need to be addressed. So it's something that I expect is going to continue to be spoken about and advocated about in Albany.
Assemblyman Palmesano, we're down to just a couple of minutes. Any final thoughts?
Well, I just circling back to the St. James issue, Brian. Having grown up in Hornell, having worked at the hospital, my mother retired from St. James Hospital. I was born there. It's certainly a very personal issue to me. And I can assure my colleagues in the state legislature and our Congressman Tom Reed are going to continue to make the case and work with our local officials, the mayor and John Buckley and our local doctors, and also our surrounding communities. I know there's a petition drive and resolutions going around to surrounding areas. We're going to try to help to get that word out to the surrounding communities and ask those municipalities to pass resolutions to advocate for preserving inpatient services there at St. James, and it's got to be a community effort. And I just urge everyone to get involved. It's got to be a logical argument and a wise argument, and that's something we're going to do and work together moving forward. So that's something I think we all need to do together as a community, and continue to make our case in a rational, logical way.
Assemblyman Palmesano, thank you very much for coming on this morning.
Thank you, Brian.
Assemblyman Nojay is next. Here in segment 2 with Assemblyman Bill Nojay, the Hornell Assemblyman who just won re-election. Congratulations, Assemblyman, and welcome.
Well, thank you. It was a hard-fought campaign, but I squeaked through somehow.
I know, you didn't have an opponent.
Well, it was, I'll tell you, though, I did spend a lot of time working on a number of other campaigns. Even though I didn't have an opponent, there were several elections across upstate New York that I got involved with because I thought we had good candidates and they were going to make a difference in making sure the New York City folks didn't take complete control of New York State politics.
And that is the opposite of what happened. Big victory for upstate with the Senate Republicans winning.
Yes, it was a great night for upstate New York. I tend, I'm at a point in life where I don't look at things in terms of Republican versus Democrat so much as I look in New York State politics as the New York City interests versus those of us that are upstate, because those really are the two political cultures that are doing battle in Albany. They are competing for resources, whether it be school aid or road and bridge money, health money, as we all know, because of the St. James situation. That's the contest. And Tuesday was a good day for upstate New York, at least insofar as we blocked the New York City liberals from taking complete control of New York State government. If they had won, the Republicans, actually they had won the last 2 years. The Republicans had 29 out of the 63 seats in New York State government. You need 32 to have a majority. Well, if the Democrats held on to their majority and the so-called Independent Democratic Conference folded into the New York City Democratic Caucus, then it would have been lights out for upstate. I can guarantee you we never would have seen drilling for natural gas. We would never see any more road and bridge money or education money and so on that we desperately need. So it was a good night. It's not as if, though, all of our problems are going to be solved, but at least now we have a fighting chance.
Can you tell us how the Republicans won the Senate back?
But I'll tell you what won the races. On the 3 races that flipped the state Senate, the 29 got the New York State Republicans up to 32. There was a race in Ontario County and Monroe County. There was another one, a Democrat named Cecilia Kasich, and then a fellow by the name of Terry Gibson. All 3 Democrats who voted for the SAFE Act. And a lot of us, Kathy Young and local supporters of the Republican conservative candidates, put a lot of resources into making sure that the voters knew that these 3 liberal Democrats voted with their New York City friends in favor of the SAFE Act. And what you saw on Tuesday was a pushback against the governor, against that New York City political culture. It was a vote against the SAFE Act that really got the New York State Republicans back into the majority in the state Senate.
How much of a factor was Common Core, do you think?
Honestly, I thought it would be a bigger factor than it finally was. I think it was the SAFE Act opposition, the repeal the SAFE Act momentum that really did it in those 3 races, more than Common Core. I had always been saying, and you and I talked about this in over the past several months, that I've always thought there were 4 constituencies that would deliver the governorship to Rob Astorino and the Senate back to the Republicans. It was the southern tier landowners that are tired of the delays and the stalling on the fracking, the religious conservatives who are very upset about Andrew Cuomo's desire to make New York State the abortion capital of the world, if not just the United States, with virtually unlimited abortion on demand, the anti-Common Core movement, and then the anti-SAFE Act movement, the shooters, the Second Amendment supporters. Well, it turns out that, frankly, the Common Core folks, the religious conservatives, and the Southern Tier landowners, they showed up, but their numbers were not anywhere out of the ordinary. In other words, we didn't really see a surge with those three groups. On the other hand, the Second Amendment supporters, the anti-SAFE Act people, they did show up. In Ontario County, that Ted O'Brien district I mentioned a moment ago, you saw repeal the SAFE Act signs on almost every other lawn. And they were right next to the Rich Funky for Senate signs. And there's no question that that is what turned the tide. In the Hudson Valley areas, the Tasic and the Terry Gibson seats that were won by George Amador, the Republican, and Sue Serino, another Republican conservative, there again, those candidates said that without the SAFE Act support, they probably would not be senators-elect. So that's what I think really movement. I think as we move forward, the folks that are against the Common Core and the religious conservatives upset about the governor's abortion stance and the Southern Tier landowners, if we're still fighting about fracking in a couple of years, we're going to have to do a lot better job of organizing them, making sure they're registered, and making sure they get out to vote. Because, frankly, the turnout numbers on Tuesday were not what they should have been. We would have a governor-elect Astorino today if everybody did their duty and showed up. But as it is, we got the Senate. We'll take the victory lap and start planning for the next round in 2 years when the Democrats out of New York City have already pledged to make another round of harsh attacks against upstate New York candidates.
Is there anything new you can tell us about St. James?
No, this is a full-pitch battle. I mean, I have never seen anything like this outside of New York City. They do have this kind of issue in New York City where the State Department of Health has either shut down or has threatened to shut down numerous hospitals. The community pushes back real hard. Sometimes the community wins, sometimes the community doesn't. We've now got a pitch battle going on. All hands are on deck. I've certainly been involved. Phil Palmesano, Senator Tom O'Mara, Tom Reed, Mayor Sean Hogan. Of course, John Buckley has been one of the leaders of the fight. So you've got everybody, Republicans and Democrats, locking elbows on this. And we're pushing back against the regional plan that's been developed outside of the region, the State Department of Health. But ultimately, as I said a moment ago, this is going to be a decision by Governor Cuomo. And we need to make a pitch that you simply cannot abandon entire cities like Cornell and leave them without adequate medical care. So we're talking all the time. I was on the phone with Sean Hogan a few days ago. I've talked a number of times with Tom Reed about it. Phil Palmesano is very passionate about this, as is Tom O'Mara, and John Buckley and Sean Hogan are really leading the local response in terms of on-the-ground coordination and working with us. So it's everybody is involved, everybody is heavily engaged, everybody's committed, and now we have to really, frankly, we've got to raise a ruckus, and we got to make sure that our voices are heard at the State Department of Health in Albany and the governor's office.
Assemblyman Nojay, if we could get back to state issues for a moment. Now that the Republicans have the Senate, any plans, and I asked this of Assemblyman Palmesano in the last segment, any plans for SAFE Act or Common Core reform? Know that there's been some so far, but will there be more?
Well, I hope so. Look, there's always another election, and the Republicans need to start realizing that the first rule of politics is protect your base. You know, I think some of the Republicans from Long Island and New York City forgot about their Republican colleagues in upstate New York when they passed the SAFE Act and they approved of Common Core and they passed some tax hikes that the governor asked for. It's time for the Republican Party and upstate Democrats as well to start thinking not in political terms. What kind of favors can we get out of the governor's office for our little projects? We got to start thinking about jobs. Look, let's face it, 90% of the school districts in all of upstate New York are shrinking in student enrollment. 90% of the school districts are smaller today in student enrollment than they were 20, 30 years ago. That's because our economy is contracting. We all know the unemployment rates. We all know the over 400,000 jobs that have left upstate New York. We all know the situation in Hornell and throughout the southern tier where we've got communities where you've got a true unemployment rate north of 20%. The only way to respond to that is to start being honest about the cost of the high taxes, the anti-business climate with the regulators, the Department of Health, the DEC, which is aggressively hostile to business throughout upstate New York, the Department of Labor, the unemployment insurance, the workman's comp insurance, the Department of Taxation. All of these state government agencies conspire to make New York State a place that private business people don't want to do business. We've got to change that culture. And I think, again, this is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. I think on my part, I'm going to start reaching out to my Republican colleagues from downstate, making sure they understand the incredible costs of all these regulations and taxes on our upstate businesses. But I'm also going to appeal to a lot of the Democrats who are seeing their communities, even traditional liberal Democrats from places like Buffalo and Rochester, Syracuse, have got to take a look at the numbers. These cities are looking more and more like Detroit every day. And the only way to turn it around is a pro-jobs economic growth agenda that we should all be united on from upstate New York.
Assemblyman Nojay, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to appear on Top Story this morning.
Well, I appreciate it. It's going to be an exciting year coming up, and I look forward to talking to you about our agendas for moving forward.
So our thanks to two area assemblymen, Assemblyman Bill Nojay here in the last segment. Before that, it was Assemblyman Phil Palmesano. I'm Brian O'Neill. InfoTrack is next here on AM 1480 WLEA. Remember, we've got Rush Limbaugh at noon, Sean Hannity at 3, and Alfred University football at 6.